earlier, I caught up with Australia's longest-serving Foreign Minister, Alexander Downer, on the Middle East conflict and the other issues in the world right now. And he says the Prime Minister should make it clear to China when he arrives there this weekend that China should help resolve some of these global issues. I caught up with Mr. Downer, and we also discussed the global response to the Israel conflict and his warnings of potential global conflicts in the future.
Well, he should make it very clear to Xi Jinping that we in the West, that in particular means the United States, the UK, the European Union, Australia, Japan, we need to work with China in trying to resolve some of the problems of the world. So we need China to intervene as best China can to try to persuade Vladimir Putin that the war in Ukraine should come to an end. And obviously, we want China to recognise the massacre of Jews in Israel recently on the 7th of October, and China to provide support for a two-state solution, and that terrorist organisations need to be cut completely out.
I'm the biggest fan of Joe Biden, but you did say recently that he has responded effectively and appropriately in the wake of the Israel war. Why is that?
Well, I think that Americans were completely right, in the form of Joe Biden, of course, as the president, to throw all of their weight behind the Israelis after the massacre of the Jews in the south of Israel by Hamas. I mean, behaviour like that is intolerable, and the Americans have made it perfectly clear they support the Israelis' efforts to destroy Hamas. An organisation like that has to be destroyed, like ISIS was destroyed. America has been unequivocal in its support of that objective, despite some objections from the mainly, not exclusively, but mainly from the political left in Western countries. So I think he's been very effective. He's moved two carrier battle groups into position in the Eastern Mediterranean. That sends a very strong message, in particular to Iran. So these are difficult decisions for the United States, but he's made them in a forthright and constructive way. And
Mr. Downer, a couple of years ago, you warned that Hamas might act at the behest of Iran, attack Israel to try and stymie the Abraham Accords, that peace deal between Israel and Saudi Arabia. Sadly, it proved to be prophetic. Was that the foundation, the catalyst, do you think, for those attacks on October 7, that thinking by Hamas?
I think it is part of the motivation and importantly, the motivation of the actual timing. The 7th of October seems to have been the, at that time, seemingly upcoming agreement between Israel and Saudi Arabia. So we've had the Abraham Accords for quite some time. They will have really annoyed extremist terrorist organisations like Hamas, which want to eliminate Israel and kill Jews. So this is completely contrary to everything that Hamas wants to achieve, an agreement between Israel, Bahrain, Morocco, United Arab Emirates. But to make an agreement with Saudi Arabia, after all, the country which is the custodian of the holy sites, that would have particularly incensed Hamas. So the attack came just as those negotiations between the Israelis and the Saudis were coming to fruition. And Hamas has been successful in ensuring those negotiations, well, if not cancelled, those negotiations have been frozen.
Now, recently you wrote that you didn't want to be excessively alarmist, but the planet did face risks of staggering into a global conflict. Can you explain your thinking to our viewers on that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to be excessively alarmist because hopefully this won't happen. But what could happen, we need to have our eyes open to. So first of all, just taking the Middle East, you have the conflict there that we've been discussing. You have in Eastern Europe the Ukraine war. in the South China Sea, the aggression of China over the South China Sea, and in particular the threat of China to Taiwan. So do all of these things link? Well, first of all of these people, the Russians, the Iranians, the Chinese, they're all talking to each other the whole time. Don't think they don't talk to each other. Every day, these countries are consulting each other and talking about these crises that they're dealing with. Number two, what could be a trigger? Just as Archduke Ferdinand's assassination in 1914 was a trigger that led to a global catastrophe, what could be the trigger here? Well, the Israelis are moving into Gaza to eliminate Hamas. Let us say the Iranians decide to support Hezbollah, use Hezbollah to launch an invasion of Israel from the north, from Lebanon. And let's say they institute an uprising on the West Bank as well. And the Israeli Defense Force has to deal with all of this. And as a result, they need to call in help from the United States military help. The Iranians then decide to become more directly involved in response to the United States involvement. And through all of this, what is Russia doing? Well, Russia will continue to stir trouble in the Middle East, continue to aid and abet the Iranians in this situation. And so China gives more support to the Russian war effort in Ukraine, as the Russians are giving support to the Iranians, who are giving support to Hezbollah. And the Chinese decide in this circumstance, the Americans distracted by all of this, the West distracted by all of this, to institute some sort of measures against Taiwan. And the great link here is the relationship between Russia, Iran, and China. So these three countries have set themselves up as adversaries of the West, of the United States, the NATO allies, Australia, Japan, South Korea. And this is a hugely dangerous time. So the scenario I spent some time describing may be unlikely, but there is a risk that could happen.